I'm here to wake you up and hopefully to entertain you, but not without some serious warnings, because I'm about risk and some risks that I've taken in my business. But before they went wrong, they went right, and though nearly all of them cost me a lot of money, by the time they did go wrong, we could afford to pay out. So, first of all, just so you know where we are, my business is Bath Travel. We're a 90-year-old family business. I'm the third generation. I'm getting on a bit. There's no fourth generation. I was 60 on Sunday. 60!
Yay!
My birthday present to myself was to come and tell you all how I've screwed everything up, which, believe me, I have at times. So, we work in the Central South, the Isle of Wight, Southampton, Bournemouth, 60 branches. We've got 350 staff, and we're turning over about 110 million. And this year, we're making our best profit for 5 years.
Yay!
We won't quite make £1 million, but I can tell you we've lost a lot more than that in the last few years. It's been hell. Anyway, so this is Bath Travel, and we're not just an ordinary travel agent, because we've been a tour operator. We had to close our tour operation for reasons I'll explain to you in a minute, but we've done a lot of exciting things. My father was in the Navy, but when he left the Navy to join the company 60 years ago, he was an inveterate gambler. He used to play a lot of poker. And he taught me to play poker when I was 5 years old, and taught me to bluff and to cheat and everything, really. And in those days, we played for matchsticks. It was 5-card poker. And later in life, we were playing for hundreds of thousands of pounds, but the principle is exactly the same. So, in 1958, he started a tour operation called Palmair, which ran for 48 years. Had Atoll license number 3. We're very proud of the fact that we have Atoll 3, because we're the first tour operator still going, or we were. And so, I'm going to tell you 4 stories. 3 are business stories that went right and then they went wrong, and one's a personal story, which is my finale, which went pretty badly wrong as well. So, the first thing is that 19 years ago now, we had to start an airline. The reason we started an airline, the reason that this became my little family's private jet, is because Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990, and the result of that was serious recession, global recession, hiking oil prices, but it caused lots of companies to go bust, including Intersun, ILG, Harry Goodman's company, the biggest bust in history, and Dan Air, a lot of little airlines went under. But we'd been using those little airlines to fly our Palmair program to the Med. And we had no choice in 1993 but to start our own airline. So we leased this aircraft for what seems like a lot of money. It was £700,000 a year to lease this for a year. That was nothing, believe me, by aircraft standards. Those Etihad planes are 30 million a year each. So we ran this plane for 3 years, and it was great fun having an airline. I designed that aircraft. I took that picture from a light aircraft at 10,000 feet wearing a suit like this. It was cold. But, my father saw the flights off, and my mother used to cook the food. Actually, she didn't really cook the food. After 3 years, something extraordinary happened, which was that a company called the Consumer Association, which publishes Which magazine, did a survey. We didn't know anything about it, about Britain's favourite airlines, and they surveyed and they polled 32,000 people, which is a very, very big poll. Ordinary Murray polls 1,200, and the minimum number of votes for any airline, as long as they had more than 40 votes, they could count. We got 43 votes, so we were in the poll, and we won the poll. And the reason was because, not because we were terribly good, but because the question was, would you definitely or probably recommend this airline to a friend? Now, British Airways got 3,500 votes, but they weren't all definite, whereas we got all definite recommendations, so we won. And it gave us an incredible amount of publicity, because Britain's smallest one-jet airline had beaten British Airways. The press loved it. And this was the Daily Mail. Actually, this was the second one, but we came 5th in the first year, 3rd in the second poll 4 years later. Finally, we ended up 1st, but we got less returns because by that time they were used to us winning. So anyway, we got lots of publicity for this, and they were on to us for all sorts of stories. And yes, they said, "Is it true that Mrs. Bath cooks the shepherd's pie in her kitchen?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." Get a bigger headline. Of course, it was all nonsense. 110 meals twice a day, $1 per sauce, forget it. Anyway, it was all great fun. And, but after 7 years, the aircraft had to be retired because, like people, aircraft also get heavier when they get older. A bit of corrosion, a few paper clips down the side and so on. So we then got another one, and this is like a museum piece. This aircraft was 31 years old when we got it. This is our second aircraft we started in '99. And it's a Boeing 737-200 series. You see the long engines on it. And, but it had more range, it was cheaper, it was £1 million. I mean, that isn't much for a 124-seater jet. And our success continued with this aircraft. And we carried on flying this for another 8 years, during which we won another award, Daily Express. They wanted some smutty pictures of our stewardesses naked on the aircraft, and we managed to come up with, that was the best we could do. The real picture actually was this. Because, of course, calendar girls had just come up, we had to take photographs of our girls naked on the aircraft, so they had to do it. And so these are called tabards, these red things. And that's all they were wearing, except for stockings, no tights allowed. But for the Daily Express, we just airbrushed a little bit out here on the hip to make it a bit more spicy, and of course they loved it. So we won a few awards with the airline, and then 6 years after we had that aircraft, my father died in 2006, which was a bit catastrophic because he was the only one who knew how to run an airline. And we had no succession plan. So eventually I had to start an airline myself, which was quite scary, believe it or not. Do not try this at home. And so in 2009, I managed to persuade Australis to lease a British Airways, a really nice plane. We ended up with a decent aircraft, a British Airways 737-500, and the first person to fly it in the captain's seat, curiously, was the lead singer of the rock band Iron Maiden, a man called Bruce Dickinson. This man has two extraordinary skills. Relatively easy is to become a 737-757 pilot, but to be the lead singer of a globally famous heavy metal rock band is a lot harder. He has double skill. He flies his aircraft. When they do the South America tour, he flies his plane around South America and then goes and sings in the band. He has short hair, he has to wear a beanie. All the rest, of course, have got hair out of their waist. Anyway, I diverge. So there we go. That's our plane. And in honour of my father, I actually was able to name it after him. He was known as PJ Bath, Peter John. So I got the aircraft registered PJ. It costs £185 to get a personal registration for a Boeing 737. That's called the Spirit of Peter Bath. Now this aircraft, we had a 3-year lease, but sadly we got, okay, here's the bad bit. We got struck down by two natural disasters. Well, one natural disaster and one thing which was slightly worse. And in 2010, April, this happened. I know you can all pronounce this. Eyjafjallajökull. This is the Icelandic volcano. Eyjafjallajökull. I know its name because it cost me £450,000 in 6 days.
Wow.
One Thursday morning in April, our little plane went off to Lanzarote as usual. We didn't come back for a week. So we had to put up thousands of people all over the place, and it was very expensive. But I spoke to Willie Walsh after the Palmair convention 2 years ago, and he said it cost him $65 million. So, you know, the bigger you are, the harder you fall. But the other unnatural disaster was that whatever business you're in, you've got strong competitors. But if you are in the airline business and you have one jet, and along comes somebody with 287 jets, then you are on the way to the graveyard. And what happened was that Ryanair moved into Bournemouth and started flying very, very cheap flights against us. So eventually we had to give up and close the airline down. And it was expensive to close the airline down, but it was important to us that no one lost any money. We finished on schedule, and that was that. So that was our airline story. But it was a great success. For 17 years we had our own aircraft, and we did very well with it. And we probably made about 14 or 15 million in the first few years, and we only lost 3 or 4 in the last. So we're still ahead of the game at the end of it. So story number 2 is Concorde. In 1996, Bournemouth Airport decided to add a quarter of a mile of runway to its, quarter mile of concrete to its runway, making it over 2,000 metres. So suddenly we could charter Concorde. And my father said, "Son, we can now charter Concorde." I said, "Yeah." He says, "Do you want to have a go?" I said, "Yeah." So he sent me off to British Airways to find out how much it was. It was very disappointing because they wanted an enormous amount of money to charter Concorde into Bournemouth. They wanted £60,000, which was quite a lot of money in 1996. And it was a risk. If it had gone wrong, we could have lost a lot of money. But it didn't go wrong. And basically, we chartered the aircraft. We flew 100 people from Heathrow to Bournemouth, charged them £200 a seat just for the subsonic flight, and then £500 to fly off over the Atlantic, supersonic, 50,000 feet, and land back at Heathrow. And we made about £30,000 profit, but that wasn't the point. The point was that we did something that was risky and it worked. And the extraordinary thing was that because Concorde was so famous, that the whole town turned out to see the event, to the extent that if you know Bournemouth, there's a 7-mile dual carriageway from the town to the airport. It was blocked up right back to the town. Most people just saw the aircraft from the roof of their car. So we had enormous publicity everywhere. We hired a helicopter, we had 3D crews, and all our staff, we had the day off to close the company for the day. And it was great fun. It was great fun and made money. These are all the industrial units where they used to build aircraft, and they all had guests and lunch parties and so on. So in the next few years, we flew Concorde from Bournemouth we flew 5,000 people. We did 13 dates and 44 flights. And the one thing I could never do with the Concorde out of Bournemouth is I could never fly it westbound. And the reason is because the Concorde weighs 95 tons. And it carries its own weight in the fuel, another 95 tons, so it weighs 190 tons. It's too heavy to get off the ground at Bournemouth, because Bournemouth's still quite a short runway. It's got to go up to 160 knots, and 195 tons, you can see it's too much. So I managed to get permission, because I got a pilot's license. One of the reasons that I joined the family business 38 years ago, I said, Dad, I don't want to join the business. But if you give me a pilot's license, if you pay for that, I'll come. So he did. So I had a license for 35 years. And one day when I was flying around in Wiltshire, I noticed a runway which we weren't allowed to go within 10 miles of. And it's a secret runway called Boscombe Down. It does jet testing with all sorts of weird armaments, fighter jets and stuff. And I knew it was there, so I rang up the commandant of this Boscombe Down airfield and said, could I fly a Concorde out of his runway? And he said, don't be bloody ridiculous, we haven't even got any toilet. We've got one toilet here, a whole bunch of guys in white coats, it's top secret, so forget it. So I said, oh, think about it, please. So I rang him back next week and he said yes, because everybody loves Concorde, of course. So he said yes, and one day in April 1997, I flew 100 passengers out of Concorde. I had to check everybody at the local thatched pub. There was no checking, so we checked them in at a pub. We had the British Airways girls behind the beer pumps. We had BBC, ITV. They absolutely loved it. And we flew to New York. I flew on this particular flight to New York with my wife, and I got back the next day. I'd taken my own Concorde to New York, flown back the next morning. My wife sat on the jump seat. In those days you could, and they allowed her to switch on the afterburners. Good fun, all good fun. So my mum and dad came to meet me afterwards, and he laid out the old Palmair red carpet. It was good fun. But of course, all these things, every risk you take, sooner or later it's going to go wrong. And one day, British Airways had 7 Concordes. We flew every single one of the 7 Concordes, sometime or other, just by chance. We had all of them there. And one day in 1989, one of the aircraft went into New York in flames. There were problems with Concorde, but you just didn't get to hear about them if they didn't crash. Our aircraft, which was going to fly to Rome that day, couldn't fly. We had 100 people at Heathrow, 100 people going to go Bournemouth to Rome, 100 people in Rome to fly back, and 100 back to Heathrow. 400 people. Concorde was broken, and you can't get anyone from anywhere else. The Air France ones don't count. So it was a terrible day. There was literally people just in tears, beating their chests, renting their clothes, but we just had to apologise and give them their money back. And then a few months later, British Airways gave them some nice flight somewhere, and they were all happy in the end. Of course, the project ultimately failed because of this sad day in 2000 when the Air France aircraft crashed at Charles de Gaulle Airport, and that was the end of that project. But during that time, we flew 4,400 people, and we made quite a lot of money out of it, and nothing ever went wrong that really cost us money. Thanks to. So, Project number 3. This one went spectacularly wrong, and this one actually, well, this went wrong for me, this went wrong for you as well, believe me. 15 years ago, I decided, because we had an ATOL license, to charter planes and go to New York, take people Christmas shopping in New York. And they had to go to this hotel. This is the Marquis in New York, in Times Square. You probably recognise it. So we had all our passengers go there. If you didn't want to go there, you couldn't go. And so we used to use Monarch 757s to fly people starting in 1997. And then we got bigger and bigger. And by 2000, we had 2 planes. We had a big one, a 320-seater out of Bournemouth, and a 220-seater out of Exeter. And the plane stayed with us in New York. There was no empty legs. That's the only way to do it. The pilots and stewardesses used to love it. They used to fight to be rostered on this Christmas shopping trip. But of course, in August 2001, we had 555 people booked to New York, all booked and paid for. They'd paid £500,000. It was £1,000 a head. When, unfortunately, something went wrong at the New York end. And nobody knew what to do because the city had been devastated. It was in mourning. It was the biggest news story of your lives, really. And the question was, what about our passengers? We had the Mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, saying, please, don't desert us, in our hour of need, otherwise we're going to go bust as well. So I argued that we wouldn't give anyone their money back. However, my father and the rest of my family argued that we should give people their money back because this was an extraordinary event. But I said if we do, it's going to cost us £100,000. So I lost the argument, my father was right as usual, and we gave them all their money back. So it's an expensive problem to have. But because the public knew that we'd just given it back, we didn't have to, they were under contract. Next year, so many people wanted to go on our New York flight that I had to hire a jumbo jet to get them there. And luckily, because of that, British Airways had just dumped 7 jumbo jets, some of the old classic 200 jumbo jets, and they ended up at Bournemouth Airport. So I hired one, and we flew 440 people in 2002 to New York, and we made all the money back that we had lost the year before. So that's the point. We took a risk, but we got out of it. Now, the film of this jumbo jet taking off from Bournemouth Airport, which is a very short runway for a 375-ton aircraft to take off from, the film has now become the most famous clip on YouTube. If you type in Bournemouth Jumbo, or you just type in Jumbo, this clip will come up. It wasn't just that we were heavy, we were full. We had 120 tons of jet fuel on board, all the passenger seats were full. We also had 3.5 tons of lace in the hold. I didn't know about that at the time. The man who owned the aircraft was exporting to New York as well, making us heavier still. But what made the aircraft really, really late to take off was the fact that there was a thunderstorm on and the runway was full of water, contaminated, which slowed us down. Anyway, I'm going to show you this news clip because on this takeoff we took 97% of the runway, which is a lot. And there were 100 people at the end of the runway for the filming. I was on board the plane. I couldn't believe that the flying club, we were still on the ground because the flying club's at the end of the runway. I thought, this is ridiculous. We're going to go by road at this rate. So, yeah. It was pretty scary stuff, and it was very wet. Anyway, there were 100 people in the runway. I had a videographer there filming, because I knew it would be quite close. But by the time the aircraft took off, at least 50 of them had just run. Someone says Jesus Christ. It isn't going to be me. That's what I call flying by the seat of your pants. So just bear that in mind. Just type in Bournemouth 747, it comes up one. 12.5 million hits. We've had 6 million hits on the latest movie, but there's another one which got taken off. Oh. Okay, this is the next thing that happened. So this is no longer commercial, thanks to commercials. I need about 7 minutes for this. I may overrun by 2 minutes. Give me a permission to overrun by 2 minutes? Yeah. Thank you. Only one says no. So, this is something else because I had a pilot's license. I can fly a little propeller plane with 2 seats or 4 seats. About 6 years ago, when I was 54, I got an invitation from the Fleet Air Arm to have a go in one of their little planes. And the point is that if you can fly anything, you can fly. They're all the same. It's like a car, pretty much. You know, if you're a private pilot for two-seater, you can probably land a jumbo without killing people because it's the same stuff. You got this and you got that, and it's the same. Of course, you're not allowed to do it. But they did allow me to have a go at this. And the reason they did is because I actually flew in there in my own little plane, a twin-engine plane, and if you fly in, then obviously at least you can fly something. So this is a Hawk. This is a Hawk T1A, British Aerospace jet fighter trainer, and it's the same as the Red Arrows. The RAF have Hawks, they paint them red, and their display team is called the Red Arrows. This is the Fleet Air Arm, which is the Royal Navy Air Force, which flies off aircraft carriers and stuff. They're based at Yeovilton in Somerset, and they've got about 50 of these Hawks. Now, when you see the Red Arrows fly, you've all seen the Red Arrows, surely. You have little red planes flying around, these sweet, like little model aircraft. Okay, this thing weighs 9 tons. It weighs the same as a London bus. It's got 10,000 horsepower engine. Flies at 657 miles an hour, just under the speed of sound. It's a single engine. Got two seats, one at the front, one at the back. Captain sits in the front, and the sucker sits in the back. You've got dual controls, so everything is in both cockpits, so either person can fly. And my captain was 26 years old, he retired. Of course, by 26 he's shot. So he's now flying jumbo jets for Virgin. But nice chap, very confident. Jet pilots are quite extraordinary, really. And I'm not a jet pilot, I'm just the average Joe. So this is what happens if the average Joe gets a chance to fly in a weapon of war like the Hawk T1A. And it isn't very pretty. So the first thing you do is you spend about 3 hours in wardrobe and makeup. It takes an hour for them to do the medical. They spend 10 minutes on your heart, 4 minutes on each chamber to make sure the valves are open, because they really don't want to kill you, and it always does. You get an oxygen mask, you get a helmet, you get double visor, you get a flying suit, you get a G-suit, you get gloves, you get shoes. I said, I don't like the gloves, I don't want to wear the gloves. I say, if you don't wear the gloves, you don't fly. I say, I'll wear the gloves. Regulation. During that time, they also measure your height to make sure that you're not more than 6'3½". If you are, and you have to eject, your kneecaps will come off on the way out. So it's really important that you're not too tall. You can't do it if you're 6'4". So, we have our briefing, our safety briefing, and then we're lined up. And so we took off in tandem. So I was in the back seat. I took all these pictures. I took the pictures for about 10 minutes, but he let me fly it for 35 minutes without touching the controls. So I was really privileged to be able to do that. But at this point, you are highly aware of the controls around you, and there are 2 things that you can do at this point. If you touch it, it'll kill you immediately. Well, 3 seconds, that's near enough, isn't it? And one of them is the way you get out of a jet aircraft. And they tell you this 3 times, then they show you a video, and you ask questions. If you need to get out of a fast jet quickly, you've got 2 choices. If you've got a bit of time, you pull the lever down over your head, which brings the cloth down, and that fires the ejector seat, and you've got 4 rockets, you go out, it's 13G acceleration, you're in hospital for 3 weeks in Sailsbury automatically in the spinal unit, and you go out through the top, and then the wind doesn't tear your face, because it blows your cheeks out at 500 miles an hour. If you're in a real hurry, you just reach down between your legs, there's a black and yellow thing, just pull that. And he says, and when you pull it, don't look down and pull it. You pull it like that. Because if you pull it and it doesn't go off and you do that, you'll be dead with a broken neck before you even go out through the top. If you do it on the ground, you're dead anyway, because you've got 100 feet in the air and the parachute can't open. So when they give you the briefing, you are really listening. You know? So we took off in tandem, and he took off 150 knots, he let me fly it. Okay, no, he didn't let me fly it immediately. He wanted to get up to a cruising speed, and from the moment you take off, you go straight to the cruising speed, 425 knots, 500 miles an hour, you're flying all the time. So all the pictures I'm going to show you were taken at 500 miles an hour, frequently very, very close to the next aircraft. So this picture I took, and it's an extraordinary thing to fly so close to another aircraft, because it's not like that, it's moving around all the time, because a tiny touch on the controls, they can hit each other. And we got really close. You can literally just wave to each other, you're doing 3/4 of the speed of sound. So then we did some exercises. He said, okay, well, I'm going to show you how to turn left. I said, I know how to turn left. She says, not in a Hawk, you don't think. Turning left, going through a 90-degree turn to the left. So to fly a Hawk, you just need one thing. It's just this little stick. It's called a joystick, comes up between your legs. It's very very simple control, and at 500 miles an hour, it's very sensitive. You turn a hawk left, basically you flip it on its side, you just do it like that, and the aircraft goes whoosh. That's the sky, that's the land. And then you pull back on the elevator, and this is what it's all about. It's called pulling G. Before you pull, you have to tell the other pilot you're about to pull, because as soon as you do, he can't breathe at all, so he has to go like that. Until you stop pulling, your weight is so great. So he said, okay, we'll fly up this valley and we'll turn left up the valley. I said, but you can't say where, because you're doing 9 miles a minute, so you just got to assume it's this next turn. So you flip it on the side, and which is, basically you do that and that, and your life starts to get very difficult. And so the G-force is absolutely crushing, you can't breathe. He said, pull more, 3G, 4.5, thank you, 4.5, hold it there, 9 seconds. And we turned left in 9 seconds. If you turn left in 9 seconds at 500 miles an hour, that is like going from 0 to 500 in 9 seconds. It's like 0 to 100 in 1.6. So it's like being in a car and going, go, 100. But that weight is coming down through your legs. It drains the blood from your head. Your G-suit blows up to stop you from passing out. And it's very, very uncomfortable, to say the least. And so we did a few turns, and then we lost the other guy. We flew off on our own over Exmoor. And I said to him, stupid question, and he gave me an answer, and then it made another stupid answer, which was, what's the most G you've ever pulled in a hawk? And he said, 7.5 G, but we're not allowed to do that with civilians. Civilians are only allowed 4.5 G. He said, why? Do you want to find out what it's like? And I said, well, I'm never going to do this again, so yes. So he said, I have control. When you pass control from one to the other, you can't see each other. He says, I have control, that means I'm no longer flying. You have to be sure who's flying it, in case no one is. So he then said, okay, suppose you want to avoid this village 3 miles ahead, 2 miles ahead. He said, what we do is this, flip it on the side, okay, pulling now. We turn left in 6 seconds, which is equivalent to 0 to 100 in 1.1. And that was the end of my flight, really. I couldn't think straight, I felt sick, I felt very hot. I wasn't sick. The other guy was sick. But I wasn't sick, and but I felt I could no longer think. The depletion in the blood means that you start speaking really slowly because your brain just isn't used to it. So we did a bit of vertical flying, that made me feel worse. A bit of formation flying, I just couldn't, we'd done a lot of G turns and I was just really slowing down. I was almost falling asleep, I was becoming unconscious. I said, look, I just want to go back, I've had enough. He was quite used to this, of course, because everyone's had enough after a short while. He said, all right, well, we've got 20 minutes, is there anything you want to see? So I said, well, I've never seen Dartmoor Prison, let's go there. Can you find Dartmoor Prison? He said, don't be bloody fool, I'm a jet fighter pilot. I've got a license to kill, I can find anything. Dartmoor's the only building on Dartmoor. So I said, well, let's just go and look at Dartmoor Prison then. I couldn't hold my head up, my neck was hurting so much, so I was like, yeah, let's look at Dartmoor. So I was fumbling for my camera, I couldn't turn my camera on, I just couldn't find the on switch. I've had the camera for 5 years, I'm just so slow, how do you do it, how do you work this thing? So I couldn't think straight. So, well, eventually I got it switched on. I was all ready to take a picture of Dartmoor Prison before we landed mercifully. And he did something extraordinary. Jet fighter pilots are, is John Phillips in the room? We have actually a real jet fighter pilot. Yeah. Anyway, he's not here. Okay. So, he did something like this since he's not here. These guys are really weird. They're just mavericks. They are likely to do anything. They are trained killers. It costs £2 million to train them. And they've got to do what they're told, even if it involves killing 100 people. So I just wanted to take a photograph of Dartmoor. What actually happened was that I never got my photograph, because we got to Dartmoor, still at 500 miles an hour, and without me asking, he just flipped the aircraft on its side, upside down. We flew over Dartmoor, 100 feet above the chimneys, upside down, 500 miles an hour, and as we went across, he said, "That's the sound of freedom, suckers!" I don't know what was going on, I just never saw Dartmoor. It's not my picture. Anyway, about 7 minutes later was the worst ordeal of all, because we landed at Yeovilton, and I had to get out of the aircraft. Of course, I was blancmange, and I was dead, shot, almost unconscious, and the steps come up, they open up the hood, and you've got to get out. Say, okay, we can get out now. So forget it. It took me about 3 minutes just to stand up in the cockpit. I went from 54 years old to 90 in 45 minutes. And it was There's a staircase where you step down off the aircraft, 7 steps. I had to stop halfway to sit down. This is me. Bloody Top Gun, eh? This is 46 minutes before the Tom Cruise photograph. And I was shocked to bits. I couldn't speak. I just lay down on the concrete. The pilot came along, my young pilot, and he just loved it, because it always destroys people. And he just danced around taking photographs of me. I lay there for 10 minutes. That white thing's the G-suit pipe, by the way. And that felt like velvet. It was just wonderful. I thought, oh. I was helped by wheelchair into the terminal. And I couldn't fly back to Bournemouth for 2 hours because I just couldn't operate my own plane. So there we go. It's another failure, I'm afraid. But I'm glad I did it. If ever you get the chance to fly in a jet fighter, just take it. You've got to take it. Life is too short. You're a long time dead. So my advice to you is, whatever that risk is you're thinking of, don't put it off. Just give it a whirl. As Confucius says, our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, though I have to say that Steve